You're listening to The Empowered Advocate, a podcast from Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center. Hey guys, welcome back to The Empowered Advocate. I'm Mary Holloman, and I'm actually not going to be hosting today's episode. Today, I'm going to let you listen to the God and Sex Forum from last week. So if you're not familiar, the God and Sex Forum is an event that takes place each year on UNC Greensboro's campus. It's put together by Students for Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center and Ratio Christi. What they do is they take a different topic every year, usually related to sex and sexuality, and they discuss that topic from a biblical worldview, a biblical perspective. This year, the topic was transgenderism, and our keynote was Dr. Neil Stewart. He is the pastor of Christ Covenant Church and was also a pediatrician in the past, so he brings to the table a unique perspective on transgenderism from a scientific perspective and then also the biblical worldview. So I'm excited to share this with you guys today. So be forgiving about the audio because this was in a large room and Dr. Stewart was walking back and forth quite a bit. So if the audio is a little bit muffled in certain parts, just bear with us. But it's a great discussion. This part one of this episode, of the God and Sex episode, is going to be his message or his address. Part two is going to be the panel discussion. So after you listen to this one, make sure you hop on over and give part two a listen. All right, so enjoy the message.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. And we thank Greensboro Pregnancy Center and also Ratio Christi for the invitation to come and address you all this evening. It's a great delight to be here. I stand before you as a scientist and a theologian, and I say that from the get-go. As Nick said, I formerly was a physician back in Northern Ireland, a medical practitioner. I graduated from Queen's University Belfast back in 1995. And worked for 4 years in the Royal Belfast Hospital for Sick Children as a senior house officer in paediatrics. I was elected to the Royal College of Physicians, the paediatric branch of that college, back in 1998. And then in 1999, I left medical practice to come across to America and train for vocational ministry at the Reformed Theological Seminary of Jackson, Mississippi. And I've pastored 3 churches, one in rural Mississippi, one in Savannah, Georgia, and then just recently, the last 3 years, have been in our own fair city here of Greensboro. And I say that this evening because I want to be clear up front. My practice of medicine predates an important change in the medical culture and the way it responds to persons with transgender dysphoria, or what we've formerly called gender identity disorder. So the DSM 4 and 5. DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for Mental Disease. It was first written back in 1952, and it's gone through 5 editions over the past 70 years or so. And that manual basically makes sure that medical practitioners have a consistent diagnosis. When you're applying a diagnosis to a various condition, we all want to use the same terms and the same kind of ideas to describe the same thing. And so up until the 5th iteration of the DSM 5, which happened in 2013, people with gender atypical perceptions or behavior were termed gender identity disorder. And then in 2013, with the 5th edition coming into practice, that term changed from gender identity disorder to gender Dysphoria. Sorry, my brain froze there for a second. And dysphoria literally means just an intense feeling of pressure, disconnection. A person with gender dysphoria, the gender they are on the inside feels different from the gender they are on the outside. So they kind of might be, you hear the expression sometimes in the popular media, a boy trapped in a girl's body or a girl trapped in a boy's body. And so the change was significant because up until that point, people regarded confusion of gender as a disorder of thinking, a mental illness, if you like. And then it was changed in 2013 to become a problem with feeling. You felt this sense of pressure. And the medical community made that change not because of any evidence-based medicine. It's important to realise that. But they made that change from disorder to dysphoria to destigmatise persons with transgender difficulties. Because when you call someone who's transgender disorder, it kind of implies that there's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with them. Now, I want to spend a little time with you this evening to start thinking through that change from disorder to dysphoria. We live in a fallen world, a world that is disordered. None of us are what we could be or would be or should be. Okay? And so physicians have no problem speaking of disorders. We speak of disorders of cardiac rhythm. Your heart doesn't beat in a proper rhythm. We speak of a disorder. We speak of autoimmune disorders when your body attacks itself. We even speak of psychiatric disorders, disorders of the mind. And they take different forms. So you might have an affective disorder. And affect is the way we speak of mood. So a depressive disorder would be an affective disorder. Or a neurotic disorder, a disorder of emotion. A person who's overly anxious would be of an anxiety disorder. Or a psychotic disorder. Sometimes people think of a psychotic disorder as a kind of a serial killer, an axe murderer. But actually, someone who's psychotic has a disorder of thought. The thoughts they have in their mind don't connect with reality on the outside. Okay? So, for example, a schizophrenic would have a psychotic disorder. And schizophrenics often have auditory hallucinations. They hear voices that nobody else hears. So those perceptions of voices don't connect with reality. It's a disorder. More rarely a visual hallucination. They may think of themselves as some historical figure like Napoleon or Jesus Christ or Moses. And those disorders of thought we call delusions. Okay, now delusion is a fixed, unshakable conviction that doesn't connect with reality. So, for example, a person with anorexia nervosa, more commonly in females than males, but a person with anorexia nervosa, they identify as someone who is fat, overweight, even though they are actually often dangerously thin through excessive starvation and dieting. So their perception, their identity doesn't connect with reality. What they think about themselves and what they are two different things. And we treat that, when someone comes to a physician with anorexia nervosa, we don't take them to a surgeon for liposuction. We don't try and make their body match up to their mind. We take them to a psychiatrist to help their mind catch up with their body. Or another example of a delusion would be the body integrity identity disorder. It's a bit of a mouthful, BIID. And that's someone who identifies as handicapped, even though their body is quite fine. So they might think they have an amputated leg, or even be a paraplegic. And then every morning they get up, and you can imagine they're distressed. They look down, and both legs are there. And they think, how can this be? I've only got one leg, but both legs are there. And they're distressed. Their thoughts and their body don't connect. And they even go to doctors sometimes and ask them to remove the leg that shouldn't be there. Or to transect their spinal cord so they become a paraplegic, so their mind catches up with their body. But of course, what do we do with those people? We don't try to make their mind, we don't try to make their body catch up with their mind. No, we try to address the mind and help them see reality as it really is there. Well, when I practiced medicine, doctors all across the world in every continent believed that persons with a atypical gender perception, there was that level of delusion, as a mental illness, to think you were a boy but were in fact a girl. Your thinking and your body, thinking and reality, weren't connected. And that was the conviction in the medical world. Now, you might think, well, shouldn't we just embrace this new way of thinking? You know, experts know what they're talking about. Psychiatrists, pediatricians all across the world have made this change. Surely we should follow them. Because, after all, don't we live in a world where we believe in progress? Goodness equals what comes next. We've come such a long way in the last 200 years. But the question I ask you this evening is, have we come a long way in the right direction? Because you see, we can easily confuse technological progression, technological advancement, with cultural advancement. It's an easy mistake to make. Germany in the Second World War was the most culturally advanced, or the most technologically advanced nation on the earth. They had the best education, the best industry, and in many ways the best army, and in Europe at least anyway. Tremendously technologically advanced. But this was the culture that gave birth to Auschwitz, Belsen, and the death camps. So you can step forward in your technology, but actually be regressing in your culture. But even think about our day and age, the cell phone. The cell phone is a technological advancement, tremendous. There's more power in my cell phone than the computer that took us to the moon. It's a communication device. We've stepped forward in our technology, but would anyone here seriously make the argument that we are better at communicating now than we were 30 years ago? Read some of my kids' texts. It barely reads like English. So this whole idea of gender dysphoria, that you can be one gender on the inside and another gender on the outside, a boy trapped in a girl's body or vice versa, where did that come from? Where did that thinking come from? Well, you might think that it came from the kind of the radical end, maybe of the LGBTQ IA movement, or however you kind of finish that list of abbreviations. Actually, it didn't. It actually goes back much further. That radical disconnect between gender and sex actually went all the way back to the feminist movement of the 1940s. And in particular, a thinker called Simone de Beauvoir. Now, Simone de Beauvoir wrote a book, a thick book, 800 pages, called The Second Sex. And her conviction was, in 1949, that gender stereotypes, so a gender stereotype is how boys normally behave, how girls normally behave. So a gender stereotype for a boy, would boys like playing with guns and trains and cars and engineering stuff. And girls, the gender stereotype would be that girls like playing with babies and more nurturing toys. And then as they grew up, the gender stereotype back then was that men would go out and be warriors and fishermen and farmers and mechanics and engineers and so forth and so on. And they would have a career outside the home. And the gender stereotype back then was that women would be in the home and look after children. Those were the gender stereotypes. And Simone de Beauvoir, she said that these stereotypes don't come from nature. They don't come from the inside of a person. Actually, she said, those gender stereotypes are forced upon a person from the outside, from culture. And so her famous quote was, one is not born a woman, but rather one becomes a woman. And this becoming has nothing to do with biology. It's everything to do with culture. It's a social construct as a culture, a man-led culture, a patriarchal culture, a misogynistic culture imposed upon the female mind what she ought to be. That men were kind of forcing women to know their place, which was somewhere between man and eunuch in what she called the feminine. And in such a worldview, this has kind of developed over the past, 60 years. In such a worldview, emancipation means the abolition of gender distinctions because they're imposed by men upon women. Misogynistic, patriarchal Christian culture imposing its idea of what women should be onto them. And so emancipation means the abolition of gender distinctions, the gender binary. Her ultimate devotees actually would go so far as saying that women shouldn't be free to choose to work at home. To be at home with the children actually is all part of that oppressive system. And so one of her devotees, a girl called Sarah Martin, who's an Australian feminist, she wrote in the Daily Telegraph that all parents of school-aged children should be compelled by the government to go out and work, be gainfully employed, to free women from the oppressive slavery of being in the home looking after children. You shouldn't be allowed to choose slavery. It should all be set free by force to be out into the world. And with such a worldview, actually, the family is regarded as an oppressive. The very words father, mother, husband, wife, man, woman are regarded as oppressive terms designed by men to keep women in their place. And so this thinking has kind of been gathering speed over the past 60 years. Now, how did it find its way into the medical world? Well, it came into the medical world actually in the 1950s and 60s through a psychologist by the name of John Money. John Money was a psychology of medicine at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. And he bought into this idea that gender on the inside was different from sex on the outside. He believed that if you could remove a child's genitals, you could change a child's gender. And he was looking for someone to kind of practice this theory on, and he found the Reimer twins. The Reimer twins were born on August the 22nd, 1965, Brian and Bruce Reimer. And Bruce Reimer, unfortunately, his penis was destroyed pretty much by a botched circumcision. What to do? Well, in those days, it was easier to create a vagina than to reconstruct a penis. And so John Money got as a cosmetic surgeon together and persuaded the parents to remove Bruce's penis and to create a kind of rudimentary vagina. Removed his testicles, sterilized him, and gave him sex hormones. And Bruce became Brenda. And Brenda was never told she was first of all a boy. She was told she was a girl and given female hormones. And as she grew, she came with her brother Brian, and they were test cases, these twins, to his clinic and were examined regularly. And as they were examined, Dr. Money would encourage them to explore one another's sexuality. Children, to the boy to look at his sister's vagina, and her to look at his penis, and back and forth. And even he encouraged them to lie together in a missionary position to explore their sexuality as children, naked. He took photographs of them. The children hated this. When they complained, he became verbally abusive to them, they testified. What's interesting was Bruce, who became Brenda, growing up with a girl's body, with female hormones, was convinced she was actually a boy. That she was a boy trapped in a girl's body, which of course is exactly what she was. And she complained to her parents about this to the extent that at 13 years of age, Brenda threatened to commit suicide if her parents ever brought her back to Dr. Money again. When she was 15, her father came clean and told her she was in fact Brian. At that point, she demanded a reversal of the sex change operation. It's really no reversal. They couldn't give her back her fertility. They couldn't give her back a real penis. But they did do the best they could, and she became David Reimer. Now, David Reimer and Brian grew up. The end of the story is interesting and tragic. In 2002, July, Brian Reimer, who had suffered with depression all his life, killed himself with an overdose of antidepressants. 2 days later, Bruce Reimer, or Brenda Reimer, or David Reimer, put a gun to his head and killed himself. Both boys, dead by suicide. And yet they became the kind of poster child of John Money's radical kind of philosophy that you can manipulate and play with gender. Now, mercifully, from my perspective, in the 1970s, sanity returned to the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and to the Johns Hopkins Hospital in the form of Paul McHugh. Paul McHugh is a psychiatrist. He's world-renowned. He's still on the staff. He's in his late 80s. He's the distinguished chair of psychiatry to this day in Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Back in the 70s, though, he was the chief of psychiatry in Johns Hopkins Hospital, and he was the professor of psychiatry in the School of Medicine there. And he looked into all of this sex reassignment surgery, and he came to the conclusion that it was a bad medicine, a bad idea based on a bad theory, and had terrible, terrible results. And in 1979, he actually persuaded the hospital to stop sex reassignment surgery. He likened it, he said, to the Emperor's New Clothes. You know the story in Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale. The Emperor, these two charlatan tailors offer to make the Emperor a new pair of clothes. And they make him nothing. He's standing there naked. He's looking and thinking, But they tell him, if you're wise, sir, and only if you're wise, you can see these clothes. But if you're a fool, you'll just look naked. And of course, the emperor was too proud to admit he only saw nakedness, so he thought these clothes were amazing. And all of his lords and ladies, the ladies in waiting, the lords in waiting in his cabinet and so forth, they admired his clothes too, because one of the principles of science is it is very hard to see what your career and your reputation demand you not to see. Like, I've got a pump in my chest made of meat the size of my fist that pumps 600,000 gallons of blood a year and runs on donuts. And if you stand up and say design, people will call you crazy. But if you see, it's very hard to see what your career and reputation demand you not to see. But back to Hopkins. And Paul McHugh said, I'm the little boy in the story who cried out, the king's naked. And I cry out, he said, not because I care about reality and not because I care about truth, but I care about the victims. Children, boys and girls, their parents, who have been compelled towards sex, gender, reassignment, surgery. And it concerned him and it bothered him tremendously. He said as well, I often hear, as he spoke to his medical team, he said, I often hear alcoholics, for example, say to me, the serenity prayer, God give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to tell the difference. He said, since when was gender and sexuality something that we could change? Something we could change. Now, since then, all of the medical research has confirmed Paul McHugh's conviction. There is no biological connection, evidence to suggest that the gender you are inwardly is different from the sex you are outwardly. The overwhelming majority of human beings, like 99.6% of human beings, connect to their biological gender, even if their sex organs are indeterminate at birth. They still seem to instinctively know they are the gender they really are in their chromosomes. This whole modern idea that you'll see now, the gender assigned to birth is one of the languages that's used in this DSM-5. But doctors don't assign gender at birth. They recognize gender at birth. Gender, it's not as if you lift up when you deliver a baby, you lift up the sheet and say, I think it'll be a boy or a girl. I think we'll make this one a boy. What do you think? But you recognize it's a boy. Because it didn't become a boy then, it became a boy at the very earliest moment of conception when two cells became one. And as that baby was born, it has 37.2 trillion cells. Every single one of them at its core, apart from the red blood cells, but every other single one of them has the child gender inscribed at the core of it. 37.2 trillion is quite a lot. You count 37.2 trillion at 3 a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you never stop. Never stop to go to the restroom, never stop for lunch, never sleep. You count 37.2 trillion cells at 3 a second. It takes you 39,320 years to finish. And all of them proclaim our gender, our sexuality. What about children who are confused in their gender? The overwhelming majority, like 80 to 95% of those children will naturally realign with their biological gender by the time they finish puberty, if you leave them alone and give them positive instruction and counselling in that direction. And yet all across America today, there is a movement that demands that when children are confused about their sexuality, that they are immediately told to change their name, to dress according to their felt sex, and to go on to puberty blockers that are irreversible in their effect. And even then, cross-sex hormones, they're irreversible. You take cross-sex hormones when you're a teenager, they will sterilize you forever. And then before the end of your teenage years, the experts will encourage you to have essentially a bodily mutilation that will rob you of your biological gender for the rest of your life. And anyone who dares to stand up and say, stop, are run out of town. Like a guy called Kenneth Zucker. He's a Canadian. He is the most quoted authority in gender. When you read the literature, his name is quoted again and again and again. He was a psychologist who ran the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto for 3 decades. He directed its gender identity clinic. He was the editor of the Journal of the Archives of Sexual Behaviour. He was one of the authors of the gender dysphoria change in DSM-5. This is not some kind of fundamentalist wacko. His is a paid-up member of the medical profession who totally buys into the idea of gender dysphoria. However, where he stopped was children. If you've got a child, he said, who has gender dysphoria, the best course of action is to be conservative and wait and see. Why? Because 80 to 95% of them will adopt their biological gender, which means they'll be functioning sexually, they'll be fertile sexually, and they'll not be left with the horrendous outcome of sex reassignment surgery. More about that in a second. And for having the temerity to say that, the Canadian government closed down his clinic and ran him out of practice. His final crime was that in the journal he actually published the largest, most thorough study on the long-term outcome of transgender surgery and hormonal surgery for transgender individuals. It was a study by Cecilia Dejna. It's from Sweden, a very conservative country. And this study looked at the long-term outcome of hundreds of transgender individuals. What did it find? It found that if you were a transgender individual and you had surgery or hormonal treatment, you had 3 times the risk of admission to a psychiatric hospital. You had 3 times the risk of death by all causes. you had a significantly higher chance of being convicted of a crime. You were 5 times more likely to attempt to take your life, and 19 times more likely to actually die by suicide. Those findings have been confirmed, by the way, in many other studies. The UCLA study found that transgender individuals, the suicide attempted rate in transgender individuals was 10 times that of the normal population. The normal population spiked recently, is now 4.6% in America. The transgender attempted suicide rate is 42%. 10 times more. That's UCLA. And he published that. The most thorough study in transgender long-term outcome. And yet, the medical experts, school counsellors, the transgender movement will tell parents that as soon as your child expresses doubt about their biological sex, the best course of action is to encourage them to change their name, to change their identity, to start taking puberty blockers that are irreversible, and then in your teenage years start taking cross-sex hormones that will leave you irreversibly infertile, and then have gender reassignment surgery without the permission of your parents. Because if you don't do that, they say, it'll delay your child's transition, make it more difficult and more dangerous, and be more likely to kill themselves if you delay. When actually all of the facts point in exactly the opposite direction. So I speak to you this evening as a scientist. But I also speak to you in my last 10 minutes as a theologian. Because identity matters. There's a famous apocryphal story told of 2 sailors back in the days when ships were tall and tails were taller. British Navy, they were in Australia at harbour, and they went on the town, shore leave for a big night in the town, and they get absolutely sloshed, they're drunk. And they stagger out of the pub at the end of the night, and they can't find their way back to the ship, and they stop to ask someone for directions, but the person they stop to ask is actually the admiral of the fleet. And they say to him, "Sir, do you know the way back to the harbour?" He says to them, "Do you know who I am?" And one sailor turns to the other. I think I just broke my mic. One sailor turns to the other and says, "This isn't going very well. We don't know where we are. He doesn't know who he is." But you see, identity matters because identity precedes function. This is a cell phone, right? If I don't know that, what is it? Well, it could be an expensive paperweight. It could be a sports implement that I could play ping pong with. I could use it as a weapon to kill an annoying fly buzzing about my study. But unless I know what it is, I can't really use it for the reason it is intended for. Do you understand that? And what I want you to see this evening in these last few minutes is that if you don't know who you are, you'll never know how to live. And when it comes to knowing who you are, listen to me now. If you take nothing else away from this evening's message, take this. If you don't know who you... when it comes to thinking about your identity as a human being, your dignity, what it means to be responsible for the choices you make, if you don't begin with God, you will never end up with certainty. The Bible says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning, not of wisdom, that's later, but actually the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. If you don't start with God, you can be certain of nothing. Let me explain that to you quickly for a second. This work if I turn it on? That's better. Save my voice. So let's say there's no God, okay? Let's say someone demands you be a secular person. And you start off thinking about life without reference to God. That means you've got to think, where did the world come from? Well, 13.8 billion years ago, you'll think that there was a massive explosion that happened for no reason whatsoever. Just nothing exploded into everything and made a terrible mess. At kind of 9:36 before tea time on a Tuesday morning, it just went bang. But there was no meaning for that, no purpose for that, no spirit, no mind, no designer behind that explosion, right? If that's true, there is no meaning to the universe. If that is true, there's no meaning to life in the universe. And if there's no meaning to life in the universe, there's no meaning for your life in the universe. It's even more devastating than that. The real ultimate reality of the universe is not evolution, it's entropy. Because after that explosion, we're told everything began winding down and winding up and cooling down. That's the real meaning of the universe, is entropy. And yet we're asked to believe by the secularists that for no reason whatsoever, in the midst of all of this entropy, somehow chemicals began reacting that formed DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, this amazing chemical message that tells cells in your body how to be and do. So think about that for a second. In every cell, you've got 46 chromosomes. And one of those chromosomes, if we estimated, that's the equivalent of 500 million words. In other words, in one chromosome, if you had a book with 400 words on a page and 230 pages in a book, that would take a library of 5,435 books to contain the information of just one chromosome. And you've got 46 of them. So for just in one cell, one fertilized ovum, you've got a library of 250,000 books. And people want you to believe that came from nothing by an explosion. That message is meaningless. Okay, so that message is meaningless. Follow me now. What are you as a human being? Because you see, if there's no spirit behind the universe, there is no spirit. You may speak of a spirit behind humanity. We all do. We all know that, of course. But if the secularists are right, if the atheists are right, there is no spirit behind human beings. You are, as Kurt Vonnegut famously said, you are simply mud that thinks. What you call thoughts, feelings, desires, your gender identity are but the smoke of random chemical reactions in your brain. There's no spirit. There's no ghost driving the machine, do you see? It may feel purposeful, but it's really no more personal than a Venus flytrap. When you look at a Venus flytrap, it looks personal. You'd think as a child, that's got a brain, that plant, because the fly landed in it, caught the fly. But what we know happens, really, don't we, is that the fly lands on the leaf, hits the wee hair, and that forms a very rapid biochemical cascade, a reflex, that causes water to flow in some cells, out other cells, that cause the leaf to swell rapidly, change shape, and it closes. It looks purposeful, but it's just essentially a biochemical cascade. And if there's no spirit driving your machine, what you call thoughts, feelings, your desire for water, your desire for sex, are but the smoke of the fizzing chemicals in your brain. A very complicated biochemical cascade of reflexes. But there's no real person there, do you see? If there's no person behind the universe, there's no real person behind your life. That's an idea with consequences. Is that a foundation on which to build your sense of identity? Is that a foundation upon which to build a sense of the dignity of the human being? If you're just a grown-up germ, who cares if the black germs make the white germs sit at the back of the bus? Who cares? That's all you are. How can you get a dignity from this idea that you're a grown-up germ? And then your actions, your choices are just the smoke of random chemical reactions. Which is exactly why in our court system today, people find it very difficult to assign criminality to people's actions. It's the dancing of their genes. It's their the single-parent home. They were bullied in school. They were on cocaine. They were on alcohol. All of this is designed to kind of affect and mix in their minds so that they're not really responsible for what happened. And therefore we can't hold them responsible. But if you begin with God, as the Bible begins, in the beginning there was God. a most pure spirit, infinite in being and perfections, who stand in no need of anything that he has made, who speaks the world into existence, a Father, a Son, and a Holy Spirit. That's an idea with consequences. You might say to me, okay, begin with God, but which God? I'm telling you, the God who has revealed himself to you. What do you mean? Don't forget, if what I'm saying is true, and you know it is, you're made in the image of God. And that means you're designed to receive information from God, about God, and to recognize it when you do. So I tell my congregation at times, my cell phone, when you buy a cell phone, you don't open the box and take the cell phone to a cell tower and go, dear cell phone, please listen. This is a cell tower. No, it comes out of the box designed to receive cellular signals and to look for Wi-Fi signals and to recognize them when they do. And you are made in the image of God. You're designed to receive information from God about God and to recognize it when you do. And that information comes from you everywhere you look, all around you. The heavens declare his glory. The sunset glows with his majesty. Someone very big and very wise made me. And the voice of God isn't just outside, it's inside you. That there's a voice speaking to you. Your conscience, that all human beings in every continent, in every culture are united by the idea that they ought to behave a certain way. And they feel guilty when they don't, and that they ought to feel guilty when they don't, even when nobody else knows but them and their conscience. There's something gnaws at their inside, like a ravenous rat. It's the voice of God. And so when you read the Bible, people ask me, why do you believe the Bible? You're an intelligent physician. Why do you believe the Bible? Well, I can give you 1,000 different reasons. You can talk about the text and all that kind of stuff and so forth and so on. But the real reason I believe the Bible is because the God I meet in the Bible is not a new God. Amen. He's a God I've always known from the first moment of my conscious existence. He's been speaking to me, revealing himself to me. So when my mother spoke to me as a baby, I didn't ask for ID. I heard her voice in the womb. And I've been hearing the voice of God as long as I've had existence. And so when I read in the Bible, as a Muslim did in Jerusalem, he's the son of Hamas, the head of Hamas. And he's given a Bible by an American Christian. He reads the Bible, opens it up to the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus says, "You've heard that it was said to those of old, love your neighbour, hate your enemy. I say to you, love your enemy." And he said, I quote, the voice of reason rose up inside me and said, "This is the voice of God." Allah says, "Hate your enemy and kill him." Jesus says, "Love your enemy and pray for him." I just knew, he said, it's the voice of God. But the problem is, you don't want to know this God. By nature, I didn't either. By nature, it's the God who's revealed himself to you. It's the God against whom you and I have rebelled. We suppress the truth. We don't want to know him. We close our eyes, we close our ears, and we will try to find meaning anywhere else. We're trying to find our identity anywhere else. But I'm telling you this evening, if you're trying to find your identity without God, it can't be done. You're like a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't really there. You might say, I want you to build a house starting on the second floor in midair. You can't do that. You cannot build a house perched in midair. It's got to rest on a foundation. And the foundation of who you are is imago Dei. You're made in the image of God. And if you don't start with God, you'll never know yourself. And if you know yourself, it'll lead you back by the hand to find God, because you're made in his image. Amen. And the wondrous thing about the message I preach and other men in this church, in this room, here, pastors and members of other churches, we preach a gospel that this God didn't just make us, he didn't just reveal himself to us, but he was willing to die in our place and for our sins. Because Adam and Eve in the garden, the first sin happened when Eve listened to another voice. The devil comes, not at man, the spokesman in the garden, goes to the woman and says, you speak to yourself, you be the spokesman. What do you think about this tree? It's wise, it's wonderful. And she listened. She took and she ate. And one commentator I love, he made this comment, Derek Kidner. He said, she took and she ate. How simple the act, how hard the undoing. God will taste poverty and death before take and eat ever again become verbs of salvation. When Jesus says, this is my body which is broken for you, take and eat. that Jesus Christ came and stood in my place and joined himself to me in such a close union, just like a husband and a wife. When a husband and wife come together, it's not like dogs breeding. It's a man and a woman knowing one another at the core of their being and becoming one flesh, and they become one. So even the debts, even the bank balances merge at that moment. And that's a picture in God's word of what happens when Christ came into this world. He joins himself to his people in such a close union. It's like a husband knowing his wife, and the bank balances merge, and my sins, and there are many, and none of them are clean. If you're here this evening and you're a transgender homosexual person, my sins are dirty and worse than yours. I'm paid to know God and paid to read the Bible, and my sins are much worse. I'll receive a stricter judgment than anyone in this room. But in that union, my sins became his, and his righteousness becomes mine. And he puts the pieces of my humanity back together again. And only in Christ can the image of God be restored. Now my time is gone. But I tell you this evening, what he's done for me, he can do for anyone in this room. You look to Jesus, he can save you. He can make sense of who you are in your identity, who you are in your dignity, what it means to be responsible for the choices you make. And if you want to talk to me after, I would love to sit with you and talk with you and tell you more about the Lord Jesus Christ, the maker of heaven and earth, and the only name under heaven given amongst men by which we can or must be saved. Thank you for your time.
Hope you guys enjoyed that. I so enjoyed Dr. Stewart's message, especially when he talked about the fact that we can't know who we are until we know God, the one who created us, because we are all his image bearers. So I hope you enjoyed that. Go ahead and hop on over to part 2 and you can hear the panel discussion. The discussion includes questions from the audience that were texted in, and it's really, really interesting. So enjoy that, and we'll see you next time.